Hey, what is up, everybody? It's Cort Smith here with bettheprop.com, joined by Ben Battle. Ben, how are you today, man?
What's up, Cort? Doing awesome. Excited for this stream and to talk about the NFL action this weekend. Pretty cool. We have some Saturday games this time.
Yeah, the Saturday games are nice, especially when it comes to the props because, as you know, when you bet the props, it's such a short window for these games. The lines usually come out 24 hours before, and we don't have a lot of time to dissect them. So always nice when we get the night games and these extra Saturday games to kind of take a look. So let's jump right into it. We've got the Jets and the Texans kicking off in about an hour's time. And you broke this one down for us in article form last night and this morning, and I've got a bunch of people on the site checking that out. So let's jump right in. What was some props that jumped out to you right off the bat here?
Yeah, so the biggest thing for me is I first like to try and see if I can dissect how the game's gonna play out. Like if the game flow is gonna be predictable in any way, shape, or form, because obviously that can dictate how lots of the props go. So the first place to look is just what the spread is from the books. And since the NFL spreads are generally pretty efficient, when there's a big spread like the one for the Jets and Texans have, where the Houston's favored by 7, like you can kind of take that, like you can use that to spur how you're gonna attack the game. Whereas like for the later one, you have Broncos and Browns, a tighter spread. What is it, like 2.5 or 3?
Yeah, I think it was 3.5. Yeah.
Yeah, like it's too hard to judge how the game flow will go from a tighter spread like that. But anyway, so especially since then looking at the splits for the Jets and Texans, they're clearly super game script dependent teams in terms of how they run their offense. They both are super run heavy when they are leading and super pass heavy when they are down. So given that Houston's favored by a ton, seems pretty likely that the Jets are going to air the ball out and Houston's probably going to stick it on the ground and limit their overall number of pass attempts. So there are a couple ways to attack that. You can either look at, like I said, the running game from the Texans side or the passing game from the Jets side. And the rushing props that were up for the Texans were mostly just Lamar Miller props, Lamar Miller yardage, but those are kind of up there. It's like in the mid 70s, and I just feel like there's a better way to attack that.
Yeah, I mean, it's never fun chasing those numbers. I mean, even when the matchup looks good, as soon as you get over that 70 mark, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. So
yeah, exactly. So my preferred angle was to look at Sam Darnold and his pass attempts, really. So the split is that the Jets have attempted 36 passes on average in losses and only 24 in wins. So they're highly likely to lose this game. So taking that split to heart. And to complement that, Houston also allows way more pass attempts in their wins. So it just kind of all seems to play together.
Yeah, I was really surprised. We're looking at your article on the screen right now, and I was really surprised by this stat you put up that in victories this year in games Houston has won, they're allowing 38.5 opposing pass attempts on average. So
that is a lot.
Yeah, that is a lot. I mean, especially for a defense that's sort of known as being pretty sturdy this year, not really giving up a lot of volume or efficiency. So I was surprised by that stat. So it looks like a really nice line there.
Yeah, and so then digging in a little deeper, 6 of the 9 of those 9 wins, like the opposing team cleared 32 attempts, and the only 3 that didn't were the Cowboys, Bills, and Titans. And the thing to note is that the Cowboys and Titans aren't actually game script dependent at all. They pretty much just always run the ball and stick to their script. They don't have any adjustment. So like them losing that game, it's unsurprising that their pass attempts didn't ramp up because that's the trend they've displayed throughout the season. But when Houston beat teams that were game script dependent, 6 out of 7 of them cleared that 32 attempt line, and like we said, 38 and a half opposing pass attempts on average. So that's why I'm pretty confident in Darnold hitting the over on that attempts.
Yeah, I like it. The only worry for me, of course, we saw Darnold leave the game with a bit of I guess it was a foot injury last game, but it came back and it didn't really seem to affect him. I know I had the under on him last week, I believe it was on yards. So I was a little bit nervous when he came back into the game and really showed no ill effects and actually started moving the ball fairly well against Buffalo.
Yeah, the game-winning drive too. He started playing better.
That's right. Yeah. All right, moving along now, we're going to check out a running back prop here. You mentioned Lamar Miller before. Didn't see a lot of value there. But we have a new lead back for Gang Green, it would seem.
Yes, we do. Yeah, so this guy, Elijah McGuire, they talked him up a lot this offseason that he could take the lead in this murky Jets backfield with Crowell and Trenton Cannon and just kind of this amalgamation of running back usage. No. But yeah, so he came back from injury midway through the season, and they were true to their word and started playing him ahead of Crowell in terms of snaps and targets. Crowell was out carrying him, but we saw last week once Crowell went down that McGuire just gobbled up that lead back role. He bumped up to 80% snap rate where he was at 55% beforehand, and that's really elite usage for running back to be in on that many plays, and that kind of trickles over into their passing game usage, because when they're in on that many plays, on broken plays and things like that, they get more just inadvertent targets, that kind of thing. And McGuire's been good in the pass game while Crowell was there anyways, while he was splitting a little bit. Right. We saw that McGuire had 5 and 6 target totals, in those were 3 of his totals in the last 5 weeks. The 2 games that he dropped below that high number were when they decided to target Crowell instead, but with him gone, right, it's pretty clear that his floor has to be at least 5 or 6 targets, and given that he has been able to capitalize on that usage, I'm definitely looking at the prop I like is over on 2.5 receptions. 3 receptions just seems like such a lock for a guy who's getting 6 targets. He has a 5 target floor. He could legitimately get 8 targets, especially in this loss. So that's why I like that one. It is juiced a bit. Yeah.
I just want to mention that we did this up last night. Wrote these articles.
True. Yeah, I didn't look at
this. And I'm just looking at this now, and it's already moved to minus 180.
Oh my lord.
Yeah, no, I mean these lines move just insanely fast and insanely big. So that's probably not a value anymore. Although, I mean, I think hitting 3 receptions is all but a gimme at this point.
It's such a lock.
But it's a tough value. So, maybe if you're a little late to the game on that one, you might want to look at over 22.5 is coming in at minus 30 for McGuire. That might not be a bad play either. If we're expecting to get kind of 5 targets or so, I think 22.5 is a pretty reasonable number if you don't want to chase the juice on that receptions bet.
Yeah, and he's hit that a couple times too. In the games I listed, when he had that solid target volume, he's hit that. So it's likely he does. It's more that I was leaning towards the juice with the receptions instead of the yardage, because the receptions are such a lock.
Of course. Of course, so, I'm people that follow the site, I'm the same way. I mean, when given the chance or when given the option, definitely sort of leaning towards volume over efficiency. For obvious reasons, volume's just sort of a little bit easier to predict. So that line's moved a lot. Minus 180, probably not a ton of value there anymore. So if you're looking to get in on a McGuire prop, the rushing's interesting as well. I'm not sure I would be doing that one, especially we're at minus 60 right now on 41.5 yards. Not a bad number, but not a great price.
Yeah, that one's really interesting because you take almost any running back, you say he's going to play 80% of the snaps, probably, like play 80% of the snaps, get 75% of the carries. You think, oh, 40 yards is probably a lock, right? Yeah. But the thing is, with the really negative game script hurts a lot. Like taking the rushing yardage is kind of opposes the Sam Darnold attempts prop. Like they don't correlate well together. Yeah. And also the Texans run D is very, very good. Yeah. They have stopped good running backs. They've held them under 40 yards. They've had like under 40 rushing yards allowed in a ton of weeks. Yeah. And there might be value there, but it's just riskier. I'd rather look at the receptions.
Yeah. Okay, and speaking of game script, I guess that probably won't matter too much when it comes to Deshaun Watson. I mean, he's really sort of just been doing his thing regardless when it comes to the run game, especially of late. We saw that injury earlier in the season, and now he really seems to be back to the normal Watson, just running all over the place and taking off at the first given opportunity. So let's talk about your last prop here.
Sure, yeah. So the last one I like is Deshaun Watson over 30.5 rushing yards. It was at minus 125 last night. And I think this one is bumped down a little bit because of the string of games Watson had after his punctured lung incident. So for those who don't know, in week 5 against the Cowboys, it was revealed that by the end of the game, he had like cracked his ribs and he suffered a punctured lung, which sounds like the worst thing in the world. But then he got out there the next 4 weeks and kept playing through up until their bye week in week 10, I believe. And the coach came out, Bill O'Brien, after the game, after that string of games, and kept saying, yeah, like he's still hurt, he's still playing hurt. So naturally, his rushing yards were hitting the under quite frequently. But if you exclude that sample and only take it from before that and after the bye, then he's hit this 30.5 rushing yard mark in 11 of his 15 games as a starter. The matchup doesn't really matter for this line, in my opinion. I don't think there's an angle either way.
Although definitely worth mentioning, I got it up on the screen here, that the Jets have given up the third most rushing yards to quarterbacks this year, behind only Jacksonville and Atlanta. So not a huge factor, but definitely a nice little.
Yeah, the Jets don't get that much pressure, so you can see how QBs have been able to scramble and get away. But that's the kind of split that I don't know. I don't know if that really plays into it as much as for me. The number's just too low. Yeah. So, Cort, tell me, let's transition into the Broncos and Browns. Take me through that game.
Yeah, I will do that. I just, I want to mention first, I had a quick look at this game as well before we move on to the Broncos.
Sure. Yeah. Anything you like?
Yeah, I'm going to take a little closer look at this after the stream, but one guy that sort of popped out for me as a nice target was Robbie Anderson. He's led the team in air yards and targets over the last 2 weeks. Quincy Enunwa is out now. So really, the Jets in a game, we talked about a game where they're going to be trailing. They're expected to trail 7-point underdogs. Robbie Anderson really seems to be their best target and their only target, really. Another nice little check mark for him. He's number 7 in Josh Hermsmeyer's air yards model this week, which is a nice little predictive bump for him. I always look at Hermsmeyer's model for some ideas. So Anderson's a guy I might look at. Let's just bring up his lines really quick here. So 47.5 yards, even money on both, and then 3.5 receptions with a little bit of juice on the under there. So 47.5. Not exciting.
I like that more than the receptions.
Receptions, yeah, I agree with you.
I think that, especially if they're trailing, like Sam Darnold's efficiency is just so bad that's why I didn't want to go in on this one. He has one of the lowest completion percentages in the league. He's miserable on a per attempt basis by pretty much every metric. So I didn't feel it was the safest one, but I definitely like the yardage over, because I do think Robbie Anderson is really good.
Yeah.
I think he's actually
he had a tough matchup last week against the Bills. Tre'Davious White, he had a really tough matchup, and so I didn't touch him last week. I kind of liked him from a volume perspective, but I didn't like the matchup at cornerback, and he looked really good. So this week I think he's mostly going to get Jonathan Joseph, who's I believe in his mid-30s and probably doesn't have the step he used to. So that might be an overall look at. All right, so moving on here to the Browns and Broncos. I'm a bit of a Broncos fan, so I'm looking forward to this one for a lot of reasons, not the least of which
indeed.
is watching Phillip Lindsay. I mean, he's been absolutely lights out this year. I mean, he's overtaken Royce Freeman, not much question about that. He's getting all the carries. He hasn't been getting many receptions the previous few weeks, but then last week after Emmanuel Sanders went out, all of a sudden his target spiked. I actually faded Phillip Lindsay last week in receptions, and I ended up getting burned on that because I think he had 2 or 3 targets combined the previous 2 weeks, and then last week he ended up with I believe a season high 6 targets. So
that's what you get.
Yeah. That's exactly right. And I sort of...
It's like one of the most electric guys in the league on the team you love.
Yeah.
Come on, Cort.
Yeah, but his passing game his role had really disappeared, and I didn't think it would change that much.
I know, you're right.
With Sanders being out, but it has. It was the Tim Patrick show and Phillip Lindsay show in the passing game last week, which I have to admit I didn't really expect. But one thing that we have been able to bank on with Lindsay this year is the touchdowns, especially rushing touchdowns, and he's been on absolute fire of late. 6 rushing touchdowns over his last 4 games. So with multiple in 2 games. 2 games he's gone over 2 rushing. So pair that up with the matchup where the Broncos are a small favorite. They do play a lot better at home. Their defense plays better at home. And the other thing is, for this one, for me, and this another reason, I was sort of looking at the line for Lindsay, the rushing line as well, which is around mid-70s. I mean, Case Keenum's just hit rock bottom the last couple weeks. Granted, I'm sure a lot of it is the loss of Emmanuel Sanders, Demaryius Thomas. His top 2 targets are both rookies. He's under 200 yards in 3 straight games. His passing percentage is right around the 55% mark. The last few games. He's brutal. He's been absolutely brutal. So I do see a heavy dose of Lindsay in this game. I think the rushing line is worth a look, but I do like the touchdowns, 1.5 touchdowns average over his last 4 games. And the matchup is right as well. The Browns, brutal against the run pretty much all year long, especially recently. And they've given up a whole bunch of rushing yards in the red zone, 11 rushing TDs over their past 8 games. They gave up 2 to Christian McCaffrey last week at home. And I really see the Broncos running the heck out of the ball in this game. And, when it comes to the red zone, clear trend here where Lindsay is the man in the red zone for the Broncos. Bring it up here.
Yeah, Lindsay has every single... So Royce Freeman has 2 carries.
That's right.
Other than that, Lindsay has every single inside the 10 carries since week 9.
Yeah, so huge difference there. So I really like that. When I don't play a lot of touchdown props. I don't like playing the one-time event props very much, and I especially don't like, I want to have pretty close to plus odds. Not getting that here, minus 125, which is not exciting to me, but. Just given the trends between what we've seen in the Broncos running game combined with the Browns, being really soft on the ground. Excuse me. The other thing that's really interesting in this game is over the last 3 weeks, the Broncos and Browns are number 1 and number 2 in opponent plays allowed. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so they've both been giving up a ton of plays. The Broncos especially are number 1.
Yeah, I knew the Browns were. I didn't realize that the Broncos were that high on that metric either.
Yeah, looking at it on our screen here. So Cleveland, 70 plays per game allowed to opponents over the last 3 weeks. 71.8 over the season, which is by far the worst. The Broncos, 69 plays per game allowed. So that's up from 65.4 on the year. So yeah, teams, I'm not too sure why that would be all of a sudden. It might just be, you know, a little bit of variance there, but regardless, I think
the Browns have been high on that metric, like you said.
No more. I'm talking about the Broncos. I'm not too sure why all of a sudden they're giving up a bunch of plays. They've sort of been.
Me neither.
Yeah, it might be a little bit of a weird variance thing going on, but regardless, I do think there's going to be a bit more pace to this game than people believe. I think the total's set at 47. Which seems low to me considering the pace that we might see in this game. So
yes, 47.
I think there could be a decent amount of red zone opportunities for the Broncos. And that brings us around to the next prop in this one. A lot of overs today, which makes me a little...
I know, we're optimistic, Cort. Isn't this great?
I know. Well,
it's such a better day when you're rooting for things to happen instead of rooting for things not to happen.
I agree that it's a lot more fun to root for overs, but it always makes me nervous.
What do you mean? How does it make you more nervous than an under? Because an under, you literally have to wait until the game's over.
Yeah.
It's last play to get the game.
It's much less fun, but it's much more profitable, in my opinion. Like I talked about at the top of the show, you know, there's a lot of things that can go wrong when it comes to these props, especially when it comes to these big numbers. Injuries, obviously, but just, you know, a pick six or something completely changes the game script. And yeah, for me, my approach to these props is always, you know, I need fewer reasons to take an under than I need to take an over. If I'm going to take an over, I need to have, you know, more boxes checked.
You need that confidence, yeah.
Yeah, in that department. Whereas the under, if I have a lean under, you know, I don't need quite as many factors going that way just because, you know, my personal opinion, and, you know, maybe this is some research for the off season. I think these lines are juiced a little higher towards the overs because I think most people are like us. I mean, betting overs is a lot more fun.
You'd rather bet the over.
Absolutely. And I think the betting public has that same approach to these games. So I do think that these lines are shaded a bit more over in general, you know, not as a rule, but in general.
That'd be a fun thing to look at in the off season too. Like, one reason that we like doing this is because it's more of an inefficient market than most of the mainstream things, which means there's an opportunity to actually profit successfully. So it'd be interesting to study on how they set the lines, like how efficient the over versus the under is, that kind of thing.
Exactly. So having said that, we're on another over in this game. And Nick Chubb, a really interesting guy when it comes to the passing game. He was sort of, you know, after Carlos Hyde was traded away, he got a bit more work, kind of getting 2-3 targets per game. And but lately, you know, we've seen a big change there in that Nick Chubb. I'll just bring up some numbers here for Chubb. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, Chubb was somebody that I didn't like coming into the year. I was pretty low on him as a prospect, given that he and Sony Michel and Georgia, their receiving game usage just kind of trickled off, and Chubb seemed to me to be just a straight line, pounded out physical you type of runner, which I didn't think would translate that well into the modern NFL. But like you just said, the best possible thing for his fantasy outlook and just NFL outlook in general has been that they have been willing to throw him the ball, and he's been capitalizing on that. So that's pretty cool to see, and don't mind taking an L on him actually being able to catch passes.
So he was kind of being steady around 3 targets-ish per game after Carlos Hyde got traded away. He had a nice little stretch there 3 weeks prior to last week with 33, 44, and 41 yards. And that was on 3 targets each. So he's been very, very efficient in that running game, or in the passing game, pardon me. And then last week we saw something very interesting.
6 targets.
Yeah, 6 targets last week. So I think that what's happened here is the books kind of saw that 17 number last week, and you know, are just sort of going off that raw number and weighting it down a little bit to 22.5 based on the raw. But I mean, 6 targets, you know, if he's getting anywhere near that, you know, I'll take that every time. I mean, 6 targets should be more than enough for a guy like Nick Chubb to hit this, you know, pretty modest number, 22.5. He's a big play waiting to happen. You know, he can take this 25 yards on any given target, especially against the Broncos. The Broncos, you know, they were hit by some running backs kind of mid-season, but they've really sort of shored up that defensive line the last few weeks. I believe they are giving up 3.6 yards per carry over the last 7 games. So they're really solid in that department, and they're pretty good against the passing game when it comes to running backs. But they're giving up 43.5 average to running backs. So, just sort of middle of the pack when it comes to that. So in a game where, like we talked about, there could be a bit more pace due to, the amount of plays that these defenses surrender. I think another 4 or 5 targets for Chubb is realistic. The Broncos are just sort of average when it comes to stopping passing running backs. And this number just seems really valuable to me. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think that Duke Johnson getting phased out a bit has been the biggest factor. Like when Kitchens came in, Duke had that monstrous game the first week that Kitchens took over. If I'm reading it right, he had 9 targets that first week. I think he had like 2 touchdowns, and he just had a monstrous game. But since then, he's been dipping. He had 4 targets, 2 targets, 3 targets, and then no targets last week. Let me look at his snaps to see if that's been dipping too. But yeah, I mean, that was the barrier for Chubb, really, was that coming in, there was Carlos Hyde, who would take lots of the running game work, Duke, who would take the passing work, and also Jarvis Landry would likely soak up some of those low A-dot targets. But yeah, Chubb's risen to the top. And yeah, like Duke's snaps haven't changed that much. He's still at around 30%, but overall, I totally agree with you.
Targets are down. Five targets over the last couple of weeks, and we're seeing the bookmakers are sort of seeing what we're seeing. Duke Johnson's receiving line has been set at 16.5 yards at even money on both sides. I think that at this point, having Johnson see more targets than Chubb is unlikely, and like you say, I think that's really sort of the only impediment to this line. That number just is very hittable. It's a number he hit in 3 straight before last week, and last week he had a whole bunch of targets. So
how do you feel about the line moving in the Browns' favor? So when we were buckling down yesterday, like I said at the beginning, the line was about a field goal for the Broncos, but now it's nearly even. I'm looking at Broncos -1.
Is that right? Wow.
Pinnacle, yeah.
Interesting.
Brownies are getting some love, so yeah.
Yeah.
Better watch out for those Lindsey carries now.
I'm not sure I'll touch that
I think
line.
It's fine. Like I was saying at the beginning, I'm not sure the difference between a 3-point spread and a 1-point spread should affect how you look at the game flow, because it's too hard to predict on that small of a line. So.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. One other one I was looking at in this game, which I think is pretty interesting. I'm not really too sure what to do. Like the Chubb rushing, it's 75.5. I want,
I mean, that's a lot, right?
It's a lot. I want to go under, but that number, I think that number is at 80.5 at Bovada today. So if you want to play the under, look for that 80.5 at Bovada. At 75.5 on 5 dimes, I don't think I'm going to touch it. I'd probably lean under. Jarvis Landry, I don't know what to expect from the Browns passing game. I don't think I'm going to touch any Mayfield props. I don't think I'm going to touch any Jarvis Landry props. The 4.5 number for Landry just sucks. I don't like it. He's very boom or bust. Anthony Callaway, I don't know what to expect. One that I think is worth a look, and I might play this once we get off the air here, is David Njoku. His line has been set at 40.5 yards, even money on both sides, -115. Now, again,
Isn't Denver vulnerable to
very? I think they gave up.
Where this is going, Cort.
Yeah, they gave up 200 plus to Kittle last week, and it could have been more. I mean, Kittle had a couple PI calls as well, and it was absolutely gross to watch. And I can't believe I didn't bet all weekend long. I'm like, I gotta bet the Kittle over. and I don't know what prevented me from doing it, but it would have been over in the first 5 minutes. So Njoku, so the Broncos given up, I think, the second most yards per game to tight ends. They're especially vulnerable in the middle of the field with Chris Harris down now as well. He was their best corner. Not that he covers a lot of tight ends, but I know that he does do some coverage against tight ends. So the Broncos really, pretty weak linebacking core, pretty weak nickel corner now. So they're very, very vulnerable in the middle of the field. Hard to trust David Njoku. That is the one thing that I will say about him.
Yeah, so his snaps have gone up. Like, he played over 80% of the snaps the last 2 weeks, which is definitely a positive. Like, looking at the trends for how Kitchens is using the players, like, it's very important, because since he came on mid-season, you expect things to change and him not really to know exactly what the game plan is right off the bat. But that's why it's really important to see how it's developed over the last three weeks once he can firmly understand where he wants people. So again, optimistic for Njoku that his snaps have risen. But yeah, Njoku's efficiency is kind of questionable. He has had very solid target volume at 5, 6, and 4. What's the yardage line you're looking at?
40.5, and then the receptions total is set at 3.5 with some juice on the over. That number does not excite me.
3.5 does not excite me.
No.
4 catches does not excite me.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. And even the 40.5, I mean, in theory, it makes sense. He had 35 yards last week on relatively low volume, 4 targets against the Panthers. So that's encouraging. But, the majority of that, he had a 28-yard reception. So the majority of that came on 1 catch. So, again, like you were saying, his efficiency is sort of all over the place. I'm a little unsure what to do with him. The Broncos obviously make a great target for him. I'd rather this number was sort of like 37.5. I'd probably feel a lot more excited about it.
I agree. I think that the receptions is definitely a no play, in my opinion. I agree with you that for the yardage, it's definitely a lean towards the over, but I don't know. I'd have to think about it before actually making the play.
Yeah.
But yeah, it kind of depends how much you believe in the Broncos tight end splits, I think, because if there was no positive matchup indications, I don't think it would be a play. But it just depends how much you buy into the Broncos tight end vulnerability.
Yeah. And speaking of tight ends, just having a quick look here as well. One play that I sort of liked right away, and then when I looked into it a little further, is Matt Lacoste. His line set at 14.5.
No.
Yeah.
Under.
His targets have dried right up.
Whatever it was, whatever it is, take the under.
Yeah, anytime I see a number like 14.5, I'm intrigued.
No play.
But I think he has 3 targets or something like that in the last couple of weeks. He's now splitting time with, I don't know, the Broncos have like 48 tight ends I've never heard of. So whoever those guys are.
Yeah, Denver's receiving usage was really interesting because it was going to be Matt Lacoste week when Manny Sanders went down.
That's right.
But especially because Lacoste's targets, like Lacoste just had the target spike, then Manny Sanders got hurt, so it was like, okay, Lacoste is going to dominate. He's going to be the number 1 option next to Cort Sutton, that type of thing, and then he dropped a goose egg.
Yeah, and then it was the Tim Patrick show.
Yeah, and so then last weekend, then Deshaun Hamilton and Tim Patrick had 9 targets and 10 targets just out of nowhere. So when those types of things happen, it makes me super hesitant to assume any type of volume from these kind of unestablished pieces. One of the really disappointing players this year has been Cort Sutton, in my opinion, as a whole. Like he was an okay prospect. I think people certainly overrated him.
I agree.
As a prospect, in my opinion. But his long-term outlook is pretty poor at this point, in my opinion, because they put him into this role that they like he had solid target volume. He was set to be a contributor from the get-go, and he certainly let down, especially once Demaryius Thomas left. He just saw no change in efficiency and production and that type of thing. And I think that plays a lot into how Keenum's year has gone too. Like Manny Sanders is good, but you have to understand that Keenum was very, very good last year when he had Diggs and Adam Thielen. Like they're two top 10 receivers in the league. So it just shows how much the weapons impact a quarterback's play, especially somebody who's not an all-star. Like you take an all-star QB, put him with weak weapons, and it won't be as big of a difference. But when you take kind of a middling QB like Case Keenum and don't give him anything, like it's been an unfortunate storm for Denver this year.
Yeah, and speaking of Sutton, just had a quick look, and 5 Dimes is not even offering a line on him, which is kind of interesting. I'd probably look at the under if they had one, but they don't, so that's the way it goes. So
they know about the volatility there. They know Cort.
That's right. Okay, Ben, well, we're going to wrap this up pretty quick. I don't know, have you had a chance to look ahead to tomorrow's games at all? Is there any spots that get you excited for some prop betting action tomorrow?
I haven't dug in too much, to be honest. Do you have some favorites? Maybe we can talk about some of the ones you've been looking at. I know you.
I just started working on my piece for the Action Network today, and couple things that jump out. I mean, it's an interesting week. There are some interesting spots for sure. One guy that really jumps out to me is Ezekiel Elliott. His role in the passing game has absolutely exploded the last couple of weeks. 13 targets last week. I don't expect him to see 13 targets again, obviously, but Indianapolis is pretty much as good as it gets when it comes to RB in the passing game. They give up the most receptions in the league to running backs. They give up the 3rd most yards to running backs. And a lot of that is the function of a very strong rush defense, I should say. There's something around 3.7 yards per carry on the year allowed. So teams haven't had a luck running the ball. So instead what they've been doing is really moving to the passing game. I'll see if I can bring up some stats here. Right, so Indy gives up 7.2 RB receptions per game. That's the most. 55.1 receiving yards per game. That's the 5th most. And then looking at the last few weeks, Lamar Miller had a season-high 6 targets against the Colts. And then before that, TJ Yeldon, 8 targets. Kenyon Drake, 6 targets. Leonard Fournette, 5 targets. Jalen Richard, 8 targets. So teams are seeing this weakness in the Indy passing game. Should be a pretty decent pace of this game. Colts are at home. Andrew Luck is looking great again. So I think there could be a lot of points scored in this game. I think that the Cowboys are going to be passing to keep up with Luck. And Ezekiel, it looks like he's sort of the centerpiece of the offense. So that's what I'm looking at. I will say, though, I'm hedging between. I'm not quite too sure whether to take the over on. There's 5.5 is the receptions line. And that has plus odds of 105. And then 40.5 is the receiving total, and that's even money. So I've kind of been going back and forth. I like the plus odds on 5.5 receptions a little bit, but that's a big number. 6 is still a lot, despite all we just talked about. So I'm leaning towards the over 40.5 receiving yards on that one. As I say, the Colts giving up an average of 55 RB receiving yards per game.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd probably also lean the yardage, to be honest.
No.
In my opinion, that would be my lean there. But yeah, like you said, the Zeke's passing game usage they've seemed to make a conscious effort to adjust it recently, which is optimistic for the Cowboys' outlook as a whole. Like the play calling has improved, whatever that's worth.
Yeah, for whatever that's worth. I mean, I've seen some people talk about the Cowboys as the best team in pro football the last couple of weeks. What do you think?
I don't want to hear about that, Cort. I don't know about that. Yeah, I mean, I think the Cowboys are good, but I still don't think they have the offensive prowess to contend with the heavy hitters. I think they've kind of slid into that Texans quality team where they're above average and can dispatch of some of the lower competition. But they have the win over the Saints, but I don't know. I'm not into the Cowboys, to be honest. That was the Saints' worst performance, and I feel like that was more on just how Drew Brees showed up. And sure, the Cowboys have good defense, but I don't think that that's repeatable if they're to face another one of the offensive powerhouses again, in my opinion.
So yeah, some of the other lines I'm intrigued by. I mean, Josh Allen has obviously been a really interesting guy the last couple of weeks, just absolutely chewing it up on the ground. Although he faces a Detroit team which is an absolute outlier in that department. They give up by far the fewest rushing yards to QBs. So I'm going to be really. I haven't seen a line on that one now. I'll just take a quick look and see if it's up. Oh, it is up 51.5 yards.
That's pretty low
for Josh Allen.
I don't know.
It is, isn't it?
That smells like a no play.
Yeah, man, that's an interesting one. Yeah, that'll probably be a no plays for me as well, but it's interesting. What else we got here? Jordan Howard against the Packers in a game where the Packers are pretty big favorites. Jordan Howard's quietly putting up some nice yardage counts of late, and it could be sort of a Jordan Howard kind of game. I think when Trubisky's back in there, they sort of spread it around a little more. It's not as Cohen-centric, Tariq Cohen-centric. So that's one I'm going to be looking at.
How about this one? How about Latavius Murray, 23 rushing yards versus the Dolphins?
Well, I went against Murray. That is really interesting. I went against Murray on Monday Night Football, and that was
I'm leaning the under.
Absolutely, yeah. His line was 23.5 against the Seahawks on Monday night, and we smashed that one. And I think he had 4 yards rushing on 2 carries, something like that. Yeah. Miami's definitely not Seattle when it comes to the run, but that line, it's interesting that line barely moved. I think that, I don't know. I think Minnesota's making a lot of noise about wanting to run more, and they obviously fired their offensive coordinator this week. So
that's a good point. I didn't think about that. How, for some reason, they think that running the ball more is what they need to.
Yeah, when they have 2 top 6 wide receivers, I mean, who knows what they're thinking about.
I don't understand that. Let me see if they have a split. Like, they're 7-point favorites, or 7.5-point favorites versus Miami. So let me see if this year they've had or if they've been game scripts dependent.
And the Dolphins
aren't great against the run.
They're horrible against the run, although they've been a little bit better in recent weeks. I think the last couple of weeks they bottled up Sony Michel, I think, 50-some yards on about 16 carries. But before that, they had given up just a string of 100-yard rushers. So the question really is the volume for Murray. I mean, he only had 2 carries last week. I think they won.
Yeah, Dalvin Cook's the lead.
Yeah.
So
I like the under there. I probably have to look into that a little bit closer before I hit it, but I like the under there.
Yeah, so they do. Yeah, Minnesota does have a big split in their wins. So the split is that they average 27 rush attempts in wins this year compared to only 16 in losses. So 27 rush attempts, like what's Murray looking at? Like
looking at 6 or 7, something like that.
5 to 8, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
It's a tight one. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the big reasons I like that Murray under against Seattle is just the slow pace that Seattle runs, right? Like they just run the heck out of the ball, and they just allow so few plays against that. That was I knew that getting more than 5 carries for Murray. So given that number, it might be a no play for me. But that's an interesting game. Kenny Stills was another guy I was looking at. He's been on fire the last couple of weeks. 39.5 is his prop. I think he's mostly going to be facing Stephen Gilmore against that was last week against Stephen Gilmore. So he's going to be against Xavier Rhodes for the Vikings, right? Which is a really tough matchup.
Correct.
So 39. That's an interesting one as well. I'm not too sure which way I want to go on that. That might be another no play. That's the beauty of props, though, right? I mean,
that's the thing about the props. Like
you don't have to force these ones.
There are like 300 lines per weekend. Yeah. So that's why it's really important to dial in on the ones you like, and especially the ones that are correlated highly. Like the Sam Darnold attempts versus yards thing is one that was like a real lesson in that this weekend, where the Darnold attempts is like 31.5, and then the yardage is 210-ish, I believe. Yep. Which is pretty low for yardage prop, but so you think, you like Darnold, he's going to have a ton of attempts. We like the over on the attempts. You should also take the over on the low yardage prop. Well, it doesn't make the most sense, because in this situation, if Darnold's going to hit his yardage prop, he's like almost locked to also have to have over the attempts line too.
Yeah.
So you're kind of just spreading your money on suboptimally. Like if you want to put more stock into that game scenario, you might as well just put more down on the pass attempts, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that, just going back to your point, that's one thing that's tricky about props, where you don't want to get caught into betting similar scenarios in different ways when some of the outcomes are less likely than the other ones, just because you like see the line and are like, oh, I need action on that,
yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you think about Tyler Boyd this week?
Yeah, Boyd's interesting, isn't he? I know that. Let's look at what his line is.
64.5 yards and 5.5 receptions.
Yeah, I mean, just off the top of my head, without digging into it too much, that 64.5 screams an under to me. One thing that's
really,
yeah.
Why does it scream the under?
Well, it's interesting. He hasn't been, he gets a lot more attention from the opposition with AJ Green out. I think it's going to be a mix-in game.
The Raiders secondary is gonna.
Well,
give Boyd
the Raiders the Raiders secondary is really interesting. It's not my stat. I believe it's Ian Hardett's stat. That was really crazy. I believe the Raiders are number 1 in DVOA against a team's number 1 wide receiver, and they're either last or dead last against the team's second wide receiver. So, but what is Tyler Boyd a number 1 receiver?
Is DVOA predictive?
No, I mean it's not, but it's interesting. I mean, it's probably not predictive, but anytime you're at extremes like that, I think it's worth at least looking at.
That's a good point.
But to me, like what I don't know is Tyler Boyd.
I kind of like the over. I'm looking at the over on the yards.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like he's hit it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the last 6 weeks by a lot. Only one of them was close. I don't know, man.
Okay.
Cincinnati's struggling so much too. What is the line on this? Yeah, so like it's a close game. I don't know.
Is it?
I'm kind of into the over. Not gonna lie.
You're right. And that, although, again, like that Denver game and that Cleveland game, which we're looking at now, 85 yards, 97 yards, that was with A.J. Green, right?
No.
No? He was out for the Denver game, right?
Green's been out a couple weeks. Let me look.
I think he played in that Cleveland game, and then he was out in the Denver game.
He had one. He came back for one game, had one catch, and so he was a non-factor. Let me see.
Yeah, you might be right. If that line is indicating a tight game on the spread, then you might be right.
Green's been out since week 10, so the thing I just referenced with the 5 out of 6 is all without Green.
But he came back for it. He may not have played the full game, but didn't he come back for one
Denver,
game?
He had one target.
Okay, so he left that game pretty early. So this is a pretty good baseline. You're right.
I'm also a Tyler Boyd fan in general. I like when guys break out like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I missed the boat on him. I got to admit, I didn't get much of him in fantasy drafts this year. So, I got him in a couple spots, but not too many. So, all right, Ben. Well, we're about 20 minutes away from kickoff here, so I think we're going to wrap it up for today. Thanks very much for joining us and giving us your insights on the New Jersey Texans game. And we're
New York. My goodness.
What did I say?
You said New Jersey.
Did I really say? Oh,
You said New Jersey.
Isn't that where they're based? Isn't that where their stadium is? I think their stadium's in New Jersey. Isn't the Meadowlands technically in New Jersey? I don't think I'm incorrect, Ben. I may not be 100% correct, but
Let's investigate.
You're very well manicured, Ben. Look at those fingernails. Wow. Incredible.
Jeez. Boy, thank you. I was raised right. What can I say? What was I looking for? All right. Well, sounds good to me, Cort.
Yeah, so I want to thank you a lot for joining us. Again, we're going to have our main slate piece out a little bit later today, breaking down hopefully 5 or 6 picks for tomorrow. While the Sunday night piece coming out hopefully first thing tomorrow morning, and then of course the usual tweet storm on Sunday morning. We're going to be firing out dozens of picks as these lines hit, and going to attack them. So make sure to follow us on Twitter at BetTheProp. You can check out Ben's stuff at BenBattle_. Ben_Battle3 on Twitter. And Ben, thanks very much, and good luck this weekend.
My pleasure. You too.
Okay, bye-bye.